So can we please welcome Bridie Duggan?
Thanks, Lono, and thanks everyone for having me here today. First of all, I just wanted to start by saying I love physical activity and definitely anything related to sports. So when I was growing up, I remember sitting in a Year 8 class learning about the female body, and there were a few things which I was like, oh, I don't really like the sound of that, especially about getting our period, because I heard it was going to be painful, it was going to be uncomfortable, but also it was going to stop us from being able to play sports. And for me, that was horrifying. But then the good news came that if you could do high intensity exercise, you could delay your period and continue playing sports. Challenge accepted. I was like, yep, this is great. Okay, no worries. She probably backed that up with something along the lines of, don't try this at home. This is unsafe to do. But anyway, I didn't listen to that. So I went home. I started training every day, especially with running. I started running further, running quicker, and it worked. I delayed my period, but what I couldn't delay are some knee injuries. Okay, so I got Osgood Slatus, which is an overuse injury of the knees. I then went and saw a physiotherapist who helped educate me about load management and how to correctly take care of my body if I want to be playing sports in the long run. Now, I share that story because it highlights 3 key aspects that I'm going to cover today: injury prevention, load management, and the female body as well. So we're going to go straight into a few quotes. I recently caught up with an Australian Opals player, and I said to her, I was coming here to do this amazing coaches conference, and is there any quotes that you would like to pass on or offer some insight to these coaches? And she said, yeah, I wish my coach had framed body composition differently. Being told to avoid foods like pasta and bread really shaped my relationship with food, both during my career and even after. I was told that losing skin folds would make me run faster, and that one really stuck with me. I wish my junior coach had prioritised my well-being over winning. Returning from injury too early became a habit that was too hard to unlearn later. So we might start there. We're going to start with injury prevention. Now, in terms of injury prevention, well, we need to know what injuries we need to prevent from happening. So the main 2 sites for youth athletic basketball trainers where we get injured is our knees and also our ankles. So they both account for over 50% of injuries. So it's 30% in the ankles, 22% in the knees. Now, if we try and look at the statistics, unfortunately there isn't a lot for youth basketball players, so we have to look at the professionals. So in the NCA, when we're looking at injuries there, they're dealing a lot with overuse injuries as well, and inflammatory conditions, and these can make up to 57%, okay? Then if we look at the NBA, that's also backed by the exact same thing with overuse injuries, particularly in the ankles and the knees. Now, you're probably wondering why you're chucking these stats at me, but let's try and dig a little bit deeper. So is there a difference between boys and girls? Well, yes, there definitely is. In terms of females, we tend to have a higher sprain rate than males. So we sit at 59%, whereas males are at 45%. In terms of just games alone, so not including trainings, just games, girls still sit higher with sprains at 49% compared to males at 42%. Now, what about positions? So a recent systematic review in 2024 showed that in terms of shooting guards, they are sitting at the highest rate of injury risk. So they're sitting at 48%. Following that would be centres, and that's at 34%. And then behind that, you've got your point guards sitting at 17%. So in terms of that statistics, you're probably wondering why you're chucking all of this information at me. And the reason why I'm saying this is because injury prevention doesn't start in my clinic. It starts on the court, and you guys are the first line of defence. So it starts during your trainings. It starts when you're going through all your different drills. It starts with your games. So if we can educate you a little bit more about how to teach your athletes to move, jump, land, and recover safely, then this is where we're going to help our athletes in the future. Now, here are a few different injury prevention programs that you might have seen around. Yes, they are from different sports. So I'll go through them. So at the first one here, we've got Football Australia, the Perform Plus program, and that's replaced the old FIFA 11 Plus, if you've ever heard of that before. Then we've got the knee program, which is from netball. We've then got the knee injury prevention program. And then lastly, we've got the prep to play with AFL. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting all of these, and I know that they're from different sports, but they include components that are really important for injury prevention. The first thing, including your stability and neuromuscular control, also including plyometrics and agility-based drills. Then you've got other things such as like your balance and teaching athletes how to land safely as well. So with those programs, there are a few that are from like the USA, but I've included the ones from Australia. So don't worry, I'll be sending all of these like slides to you as well, or extra information if you needed to know more about them. Now, in terms of the programs, the reason why they are important is because when you look at how much they can decrease the amount of injuries that people get, it's quite large. So the KIP program, so the third one across there, it decreases ankle injuries by 66%. In terms of ACL injuries, it decreases the risk of those injuries happening by 73%. Okay, so that's a huge amount. That is literally season changing right there for you. Now, in terms of being specific with like your injury prevention, these are programs and the exercises in them you can include into your warm-ups or into your training. But in terms of injury prevention warm-ups, the reason why we want to try and include them is because they're going to elevate your heart rate, they're going to work your major muscle groups, but they're also going to teach you and prime you for the rest of that session that's ahead. Now, we might use ACLs as an injury because that seems to get a lot of media attention at the moment. So in terms of ACLs, for us to try and prevent ACL injuries from happening, we need to know, well, what causes them? So there's 4 main things that the evidence suggests. The first thing is sudden deceleration or stopping. The next thing would be landing mechanics, so knee valgus with the knees coming in. The other thing is cutting, so if we're cutting and we don't have our feet under our base of support and it's too far in front. So that's something that's actually probably copying the most at the moment. And the last one would be landing with the foot being planted and not being able to unstick it properly. So we'll go into that a little bit more as well. So it's important that we understand what causes it, because then you can look out for those things as a coach. Now, I'm obviously not a coach, so if a player came up to me and said, how do I dunk? I'd probably start by saying, well, I haven't in a while, or probably ever, so I'm not going to try. But what I can try and help you with your coaching is the fact that there are some key points that you can look out for, and I'll put them up now. So, in terms of landing with soft feet, so you're not landing heavy when you're coming down. In terms of your alignment, you want to make sure that your knees and ankles are in line. We always hear about make sure your knees aren't over your toes. That's a bit of an old myth. So if you hear that, we're focusing more on just ankles and knees being in line. With pivoting, you want to bend the knees and hips to reduce the stress. And then also with pivoting, keep feet close to your base of support, like I was saying before. Most of the biggest ACL injuries we see are when people have their leg out and now they're trying to go in the opposite direction. Lastly, this is a bit harder to obviously cue at trainings, but encouraging your athletes to strengthen their quads, their hamstrings, and also their core control in particular. And use plyometrics and balance drills to improve muscle control and also reaction time there. Now, one thing that I kind of want to harp on about injury management instead is who your athletes are then, or your youth, are then going to see if they do have an injury. So I'm obviously very biased. Being a physiotherapist, I'm going to encourage that you get them to go see a physio, but not just any physio. You want to make sure that they're working in sports, okay? And the reason being is because we have to be up to date on the evidence. So I'm currently about to finish my Masters in Sports Physiotherapy, and the evidence that I'm learning now is completely different to even what I've learnt 2 years ago. So if someone came to me and said, I've got an Achilles tendinopathy, I've been told to stretch it, I would actually cringe at that thought right now. Whereas 2 years ago, that's what we were still encouraging people to do. So we need to stay up to date. And another reason why is because otherwise you're going to get your athlete coming to training on a Tuesday and they're going to tell you, I can train at 50%. What is 50%? Like half the session, 50% like with your speed? Like I don't even know what that means. So I don't know how like you can even work off that as well. So we've covered a bit of the injury prevention there. So we're going to go into load management. So load management, what is it? It's the strategic planning of your players or your team's workload to make sure that you're decreasing the risk of injury and you're also enhancing their performance in the long term. So there's two different types of load that we go off. There's internal load and there's external. So the external we can measure because it's physical. So that's things such as like the distance that athlete's running, the speed, the intensity, the type of activity that they're doing, and the duration. And we're going to go into a bit of that. And then you've got your internal load, which we're going to hear a little bit more about tomorrow. But that's things such as your stress, your environment, also your genetics, your age. So they're the things that are a little bit harder for us to manage in terms of getting objective measures from. So we're going to go into the external load, like I said. So as a physio, in order for us to measure progress, we have to get an objective measure. So for your load, two easy metrics that you can remember. The first one is volume, so the duration of your training. So it might be that session was 60 minutes, so that's your volume. Then your other thing that we need is the intensity, and that's measured in rate of perceived exertion. So if you haven't seen the RPE load in terms of one being, very, very easy session, and then you've got 10 being extremely hard, that is how you can get your athletes to measure their load in particular. So in terms of coming back to the load, I thought I would just quickly show you who that person was that made those quotes before. So this is our Australian captain, previous Australian captain, Tess. Tess and I actually did our first degree together, so a degree in exercise and sports science. And I said, what are your goals? And she said, I want to be captain for the Australian team. And I was like, incredible. And she's like, what's your goals? And I was like, well, I want to be the physio for you guys. So that kind of worked pretty well there. So in terms of the load management, like I was saying, with the scale on the right-hand side, that's an easy way for us to get athletes to say, how hard was that session? So you might plan it to be a 6, but that athlete might interpret it as like an 8 or a 9 because they're so fatigued or they're having a really rough day. So that's what the athlete will be recording rather than what you will set for that session. So in terms of workloads, what's safe is if we recommend like a 10% increase per week. If it goes above that and it becomes more like 130 to 150, we increase the risk of injuries. If we go above 150, we pretty much open the door to like an injury, okay? So fracture rates highly increase around this workload. So how do we get to that sweet spot? I might do like a bit of a quick example if you're preparing for your nationals. So let's say we know what nationals involves. It involves 8 games, for example, in 7 days. We know the RPE is going to be quite high and we can guess the minutes. So from those calculations, we can look over and see we've got a weekly load of 4680. All right, so that's what we're expecting for that tournament. As an S&C coach, it's usually best if we can run and work backwards. So we know what we have to get to, so what are we currently doing at the moment? If we've got 10 weeks to go until that tournament, then we need to calculate our acute load. So that is the load that you did in that week prior. And then we compare that to the chronic load, and the chronic load is the average of the 4 weeks that you've done, okay? So when we're looking at this, and as I've mentioned at the top there, the goal is to stay between 1 to 3 to 1.5, ideally, like if we can get to there, nothing at greater than 150%, If we can stay between those areas, then that's going to be safe. So then once we've got this table and we know where we're at for week 1 and we know where we need to be for week 10, then we can safely try and increase that load during those weeks. So for some of you, this RPE might be new, and then for others, it might be something that you've definitely got a lot of experience on there. From here, we kind of lead into sports specialisation. So you might have heard that term. What does it mean? Basically, sports specialisation is when an athlete is just doing one sport for greater than 8 months for the year. In terms of sports sampling, that's when your athlete is doing multiple sports within the year. And that's actually highly recommended, because if an athlete just does one sport, they increase the risk of an injury to 70 to 90%. And if they continue doing that one sport greater than a few years, they definitely are increasing their risk of overuse injuries, and it can be as high as 81%. So in terms of sports specialisation, you want to try and encourage other sports for those youth athletes. From here, you might be training or coaching young athletes, so they might be like under 12s, and then you think, well, you know, what type of load are we working with here? Well, between the ages of 8 and then up to the ages of 16, you should be training them as a maximum of what their age is. So if you've got a 10-year-old athlete, their maximum should be 10 hours of training per week. So that is a rule of thumb up until 16 years of age, okay? There is a bit of a give and take they're now showing at 15 and 16 where you can add on another 2 hours, but I definitely wouldn't be going past those 2 areas because that can definitely increase the load as well. Now, from here, how do you plan your sessions? What are some main things that you want to try and work on? First thing is progressive overload. If you want your athletes to perform better, you need to make sure that there is overload and you're progressing it each week. If you stay at the same level, unfortunately, that's not great for the athletes. They're not going to perform better. You're not going to see big changes in their athletic ability, okay? So progressive overload. The next thing is specificity. So if we're trying to think of basketball, we obviously need to think of, okay, we need them to be faster, be able to jump very high, be able to increase their agility. So we're probably not going to put them in the pool 3 times per week doing backstroke, okay? We need to be specific with what we're training them with. But in terms of being specific, we also do need a bit of variety because otherwise athletes do get bored and it can cause burnout as well. And then with your training sessions, trying to make sure that they're not just one size fits all because that doesn't work, okay? So trying to shape it a little bit around those training principles in particular. Now, the next thing that we would lead on to after you're planning your sessions is, are you planning too much in your sessions? So are you overloading your athletes? When we overload them too much, that causes to overtraining, and then we start to welcome in bone stress injuries. So this can happen when we have a spike in training loads. It can happen with poor recovery or poor specific conditioning for those athletes in particular. So with bone stress injuries, you're basically loading the bone more than its current capacity. So an easy way to think of it is if you think of your bone as being as strong as a 2-kilo dumbbell, and then you've now started using a 3-kilo dumbbell, it's not that big of a jump, your body will learn to adapt. But if you go from a 2-kilo dumbbell to a 5-kilo dumbbell, that's massive, and that's when we're going to get those bone stress injuries. Now, there is new data emerging saying that it's not actually the stress of the bone that obviously starts to cause the bone stress. It's the muscle fatigue that attaches to that bone, and therefore that's where we're seeing the stress on it. So we need to be careful about if we're going to get scans for these athletes, especially if the athlete has had pain for only 2 days. You need to give it a few more days and sometimes up to a week to see what the true representation of that bone stress injury is. So don't try and rush into those scans straight away if you can. Give it at least a week's worth because you'll notice a big change in the bone and how that will recover. Now, unfortunately, we don't have data on youth athletes for bone stress injuries in particular. We actually have more on, obviously, professional athletes, but when are we most at risk is in the pre-season. And the reason being, obviously, you've come off a break, so a big rest, and you're going straight into heavy load, heavy S&C sessions. And then the second time that we're most at risk is within the first 6 weeks of your season. So what can you do to try and help that? Well, when you finish your season and you say to your athletes, I want you to have a good break, that doesn't mean a complete break. They still need to be doing some sort of conditioning. So make it fun. So maybe saying to your athletes, this is like a 10-week program that I've put together. Maybe you can all catch up together and do this at some point. Or whether it's a handout, whatever you would need to do with your club. So by mentioning those statistics in terms of bone stress injuries, it takes me into a new term that some of you might have heard before, but it's RED-S or